cybersecurity, property rights, and many of the emerging technologies. He's an author of several books, including The Ruling the Root, Internet Governance and Taming of Cyberspace. But also, he has served in the ICANN. How many of us know about ICANN? Okay, I was hoping there were more hands behind. I was trying to avoid the front. Yes, and I believe is one of the co-authors of the current book report that we are going to be talking about. So Dr. Professor, those are many titles, so I'll stick to one. Professor Milton, you're most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I'll start with a question for Professor Mula. In the book on the political economy of digital governance in Tanzania, Pathways to ICT Sector, you present a unique analysis where you say Tanzania presents a unique digital anomaly where connectivity is rising, yet digital services share of the economy is actually shrinking. And I think this is also among the many conversations that we've had, especially yesterday. So based on this report, what is the fundamental disconnect here, and how has the influence of, chronism, right? Chronism and political interest shaped this specific outcome? I'll start with that because sure. I think the book, the report, I don't know if Asha, the report is widely accessible by everyone. Yes. Yes. Yes, it's a 77-page report, so we are going to try to summarize it in an hour. So please, Dr. Professor Mula, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's good to be back here again. We can have a more interactive conversation about the report. So the first question was, what accounts for this disconnect? So we talked about how in the rest of the Eastern Africa, generally you see as connectivity rises, you see the service economy increasing, and you see the contribution of the digital economy to the overall economy also increasing. And in Tanzania, you don't see that. And that's the kind of the mystery that was the starting point for this report. And we think that there's a pretty clear explanation for this, and that is fundamentally all of the restrictions that have been put into place by the government, some of them for political reasons, some of them for taxation reasons, some of them, frankly, just boneheadedness. So there is a kind of a barrier, right? You want to go from connectivity, you create a market, and in order for people to step into that opportunity, they have to be able to do things. And what Tanzania has done is they've created all of these barriers and taxes before you take that step. And I had you had a wonderful panel yesterday of the startups, right? That was so much fun to watch. You know, you have the entrepreneurs here, you have the energy. I also visited the D Lab in the Dar es Salaam University, where you have students in labs that are like, it looks just like a Georgia Tech lab, except maybe their facilities are not as fancy as ours, but you've got the energy, you've got the potential talent. And so the question is, suppose these students develop a really cool idea for some kind of a digital service. What happens next? How do they get into the market? Well, what happens next is they discover that they have to get licenses or they have to get approval. One of the regulations mentioned yesterday was if you get any kind of a investment from an outsider, which is always necessary, you always have to have capital to start a business, then if it's over a very low threshold, you have to go to the Competition Commission to get approval. And that takes 6 months at least. And the criteria, you know, it's almost the opposite of its rationale. If they're concerned about competition, it sounds like they're stopping competition. They're not actually protecting it. So this is just one of the examples of the barriers that will be confronted by somebody trying to enter the digital economy.
Thanks so much, Professor. And again, that has kind of echoed out just away from the startups, from the individual startups, but also the overall framework or legislative framework, and when it comes to, you know, improving connectivity and also digital uptake. However, one of the other underlying issues, and I think also I may have had that at the keynote address, was the issue of the shutdowns. And in the report, of course, there was an interesting figure that was cited about 250 million US dollars that cost the Tanzania economy during the 2025 October election shutdown. But beyond this kind of immediate financial loss, how are policies on data localization, content licensing, the VPN restrictions which are in place, how are these impacting, how are they impacting, or how are they likely to impact Tanzania's long-term reputation as a destination for foreign investment, and perhaps its goals for digital transformation?
Right. So the shutdown in particular, and if you remember, if you were here yesterday, the representative of the ministry was quibbling with my number. It was actually not my number. It was something that we picked up. And generally, when you're estimating the cost of something, it's kind of an artificial exercise, right? You're coming up with some kind of per minute or per person cost, and then you're multiplying it by the number of days. And yeah, okay, was it 250 million? Was it 150 million? The point is, it was bad, right? It was not good for the society. It was not good for the economy. So the issue is the overall reputation. I think you put it very well. What does that do to foreign investors if you're going to put money into the digital economy and try to develop Tanzania as a market, and then you discover that whenever there's political instability or whenever there's a problem, the government can just pull the plug? Obviously, that's a deterrent, right? And just to bring things, just to show that we're not lecturing you from on high, the U.S. knows all about political uncertainty right now, right? And we know we have tariffs that are 50% today, 40% tomorrow, 100% country by country. This has been devastating to investment even in the U.S., right? So you can imagine a small country that might be considered a small opportunity for an investor. If they know that kind of thing can happen, they're going to be very careful and very possibly withhold the opportunity that would otherwise be there for them to get involved in the market here.
Thanks, Professor. But if we look at, because I think the pandemic of internet shutdowns is not just unique to Tanzania, but it is a pandemic where I come from in Uganda, it is a normal thing that, around the elections, we'll have the internet shutdown for a week or two. In West Africa, we've seen countries like Chad or Togo, but we've also seen in the Eastern Horn, in Ethiopia, we've seen similar cases. And perhaps I wanted to see how can we compare the economies, say, I don't know if the report goes deeper into that kind of comparative analysis for countries like, say, Chad, I will not say anything about Uganda, but Ethiopia or India, which has had, these kind of shutdowns, what has been the kind of, impact on the political economy or the digital economy of these countries, just for us to counter the narrative that, we are saying things that, the government otherwise does not really think that is really so much of a bigger issue.
Yeah, to say that other people do it, is that the rationale? For example, the minister mentioned the UK, and first of all, everybody I know who kind of advocates for digital policy was against that. And it was viewed as a very poorly thought out and not very destructive kind of a move, but it was very limited. It was like around one subway station in a particular neighborhood of London, right? So it wasn't like the entire country shutting down. And if you believe, I just don't understand the connection here between an election and shutting down public communication. My understanding of democracy is that you want people, you have a free election, you want people to debate and exchange ideas about who to vote for and why you should vote for them. So what are you accomplishing by shutting things down? Now, it's true that in some African countries, I'm thinking of maybe Nigeria and Kenya, you have had instability and violence associated with elections. And that is indeed something that should not be minimized as a problem because democracy, a dictatorship and a totally hierarchical control of the political change is going to be possibly more stable, at least in the short term. But in the long term, if you cannot have a free and open discussion of who your leaders are going to be, and you cannot have a free and open vote, that's going to be less stable. So there might be some rocky times when you have these elections, but you have to commit yourself that this is the way we change power. It is not unilateral. It is not the government saying, we'll let you discuss and debate when we want you to and not when we don't. It's got to be, there's got to be a commitment to ongoing democratic process. And shutting down the internet and shutting down public discussion of the election is inimical to that, is against that.
Right. As a follow-up to that, I think one of the many reasons we've always had has been on national security and sovereignty. And this has been one of the biggest challenges, when it comes to, reforming, whether it is the political economy. But perhaps from the research findings and from your point of view and from all the data you interacted with, how can Tanzania balance these legitimate concerns with a need for a transparent regulatory framework? Specifically, what role can institutions like the Tanzania Communications Regulatory Authority, TCR, and the judiciary do in order to restore this kind of, public trust within the digital system?
So I'm not sure I understand the connection between the sovereignty issue and the trust. Can you explain more about what you mean by that?
Yeah. So many of the issues that we are seeing that are coming up when it comes to regulation are about digital sovereignty, right? We need to protect our data, whether it is localization, we need to have servers, we need to have, this kind of control, who controls, who has access to this data and for what purposes. I think we've seen that in the digital economy space, especially I think when it comes to issues of, banking, cloud computing and all that. But it's also something that has been picked on from the conversations, yesterday's conversations when it comes to, I think I attended a session here on about Africa data centers and all that. And one of the issues that we were coming about was about digital sovereignty, data sovereignty and the like. But also we've also seen that most of the regulatory frameworks, not just in Tanzania, have an aspect of promoting national security. But somewhere in between, that kind of, it is a legitimate concern, but at times it gets overstepped, when it comes to the actual implementation, because there are aspects that kind of, citizens feel they should be allowed to, for instance, leave the internet on, access, debate and all that. So how can institutions like the regulatory authority that oversees aspects of this kind of, frameworks, and probably the judiciary that fails to stop, aspects of, say, shutting down the internet, but also enabling the actual adoption and practical implementation of these frameworks. What, I don't want to use the word advice, but how can we, what kind of recommendations can we give institutions like TCR and the judiciary to be able to build more trust in the citizens, to actually show that these policies or these frameworks or these legislations are there to assist you to be able to enjoy the internet in the rightful way it should be?
Okay, so let me just give a kind of a political science related definition of sovereignty. Okay, so sovereignty means that your government is the sole and exclusive political authority, the rule maker for your territory, right? And the term digital sovereignty has become very popular in Africa, and I've noticed this. And in some sense, I can sympathize. It means that the digital economy is somehow in your control, in your own control, that it is self-governed, right? And I'm in favor of that. But there is no sovereignty in cyberspace, in the sense that there is going to be a single exclusive political authority over the digital cyberspace, because the cyberspace is by definition globally compatible and interconnected, right? So what you want is, you want your data to be protected. That doesn't necessarily mean it's stored in your territory, right? It could, in fact, mean something very different. The storage of it in your territory means fundamentally that your government has more control over it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you do, right? You understand the distinction here? For example, in Russia, when they enacted a digital sovereignty law, it was because when they wanted to spy on people or surveil people, if they had to ask an American company like Google for access to the user data, the Google might not give it to them. So they say, if you store the data in our territory, then we know that we can order the local Russian provider to give us access to the data and we will get it. So a lot of the so-called digital sovereignty measures are simply designed to empower the state at the expense of the people. And in fact, storing the data in Tanzania does not necessarily mean it's more secure from a cybersecurity standpoint, right? We can break into your data from outside as long as it's connected to the internet. If you are running some kind of a platform or business or bank in Tanzania, cyber criminals from anywhere in the world, if they can figure out a way to break in, they will be able to break in. So you do not necessarily create more cybersecurity by putting the data in a particular geographic territory. All you do is ensure that your government has some kind of legal authority over how it is accessed, right? So maybe you don't want your government to have that much control over how the data is accessed. Maybe you want it to be more secure, and you might want to use a cloud provider that is maybe has better cybersecurity practices than a local one. Just to give you an example, Ukraine was under Russian attack, and they moved their entire governmental data structures into the cloud run by Microsoft because their territory was being hit by missiles, right? So they actually increase their data security by moving it out of the country. Right? Now, it's also true that if you use a foreign provider for data storage or services, then your government will have less control over it. And if the government has good regulations and good controls that actually protect people as opposed to themselves, then that could be a good thing to have some kind of regulation that is domestic regarding the treatment of data. But in most cases, it's really more about just the government having control for its own purposes rather than that. So I think that we don't want to get confused about this notion of digital sovereignty. There's no sovereignty over cyberspace per se. There is sovereignty, political sovereignty over the territory of Tanzania with regard to who is the government. So if China or the US or any major power is trying to push your government around, that's a violation of sovereignty. If your customers, if your users are patronizing service providers in other countries, that is not a violation of your sovereignty. And one thing I've noticed about Tanzania is that in terms of cybersecurity, like Dan was talking about a major cyber attack, it seems to me your government has been actually very good at being non-aligned and not getting itself involved in foreign conflicts and foreign problems, right? So that means that's the most important, forget about all the technical stuff. The most important thing you can do to protect cybersecurity and national security is to not get involved in stupid conflicts overseas and not try to manipulate other countries or not let them manipulate you, right? So actually Tanzania has been pretty good at that, is my understanding. So
that's it.
Does that answer that question?
Yes. You do to a wider extent. And again, we hope that that can stay and there can be a bit of more trust in the judiciary to ensure that, the policies, the legislations that come out are kind of, they align with the so-called national interests, but also with the citizens' expectations of what, they should do for the digital system. But as we move on, and I think I have just about like 2 more questions, and then I'll open up the floor, hoping that we've had people who have had a chance to look at the report. The kind of recommendations, and I think you put this in a summary, that these recommendations are designed to be politically survivable. And that kind of, picks onto what you just said about, being neutral, playing it, good and safe in the environment. But is there a single kind of reform that you would can most unlock the private sector investment and growth? And if there's that one single reform that when you did this kind of, analysis of the, ICT sector, which sectors might need more convincing for them to be able to adopt that recommendation?
Yeah, I think if you're going to say, pick one thing that you should do first, I think it has to be these, what we call the ex ante or before the fact restrictions on content and service development, right? It's like getting permission and telling a startup that they have to pay like all of these taxes. This is, I think, the first thing that just has to go, right? If you really want to develop your digital economy, you can't have these walls around entry, around market entry. Mm-hmm. And again, I would invoke the startup panel from yesterday. I don't know if you were in there, but it was, you just get a sense of how limiting these regulations are. They just, and I asked one of the entrepreneurs, like, This particular regulation seems so restrict access and restrict services because they're afraid that if they have this open environment that the political climate will change and they might lose power. And both of those explanations, I think, have a bit of truth in them. I do see signs that the Tanzanian government will listen to people, and you'll go before this tax board and you'll say, we think this tax is bad, we want to get rid of it. And then they'll say, well, where will we get the missing money? And you have to give them ideas about how to get that. That's kind of interesting. But the point is, you still have a democracy to some extent. And I think if you want to really strengthen that democracy, you really need to open up entry into the online economy and start having a much more diverse set and get rid of these ex-ante licenses and taxes that just block people from getting on.
Thank you, Professor Mula. And I'll pause a bit and look at the audience if they have. I'll take two because I know the MC will fire me. In the interest of time, we'll take one or two questions. I think there's a hand here. And then I don't know if it was a hand or it was just yes, there's a hand there. We can take one and then we give it to, and then a second one here. Okay, three, gender balance. Yeah. There's one here, another hand here, and then this table. So three questions, and then we'll give it to Professor to conclude.
Thanks very much, Dr. Milton. And indeed, fire chat has been fire when you cemented that there is no independence in cybersecurity and self-governance as the nation. So mine is a bit of comment that across the world, there is a decline in, my name is Robert Majiga. I'm working with Tech and Media Convergence as a policy and civic tech lead. I'm also a fisherman and an advocate of the High Court. So across the globe, there is decline in confidence in of people in democratic institutions, and how there's countries are learning their government. There is also increase, according to the Global Democracy Report of 2025, there is also increase of authoritarianism, and in the countries that were most perceived to be democratic countries like US, now citizens and public opinion is that there's countries are running into authoritarianism. I had a pleasure to attend the People's Meeting in Denmark past few days, and one of the key discussion was on how now Europe has declined also in democracy with ongoing global politics and what is happening. Now, my key comments that I want you to highlight maybe from your perspective and maybe from the academic perspective and your experience working on cyberspace, with the unchecked power that the countries have now entrusted to these tech giants and on how they are running and operating their business. Take for example, the US new AI and cybersecurity strategies on how they have given this tech power, VASIT power to engage, and then how also they have engaged, for instance, Elon Musk's AI platform and to be used in military. Do you think, is it possible still for the government to hold accountable there's giant tech companies when they misuse or they use against that privilege, and on how can African countries leverage into this kind of systematic domination which have been placed all over, as we still rely much on the information and security systems that are designed by the West? Thank you.
Thank you. Would we like
do one question at a time?
What would you prefer? We'll take all of three of them.
You take the three and then
Yes,
then
yes.
answer. Okay.
Okay. There was a hand here and on this table. So maybe we can start here from our brother from Zimbabwe.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Mueller. In 2017, there was a genocide in Myanmar, where the Rohingya were killed in large numbers due to some. So I'm saying in 2017 there was a genocide in Myanmar involving the Rohingya, and it has been found that part of what happened was that the algorithms for Facebook made prominent the hate speech that was proliferating in Myanmar about the Rohingya, which contributed in many ways to that genocide. So for countries like Tanzania that have started expanding in terms of the digital space, how can they balance between the need for freedom of expression on one hand and the need to protect citizens from hate speech that can cause such a catastrophe? Thanks.
Thank you. And one more last from the lady here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anoska Kitindi. I'm an advocate at Victoria Attorneys and Consultant, a law firm based here in Dar es Salaam. Thank you so much for your presentation. But my question is, since yesterday we've been having this discussion that among the major impacts that Tanzania has faced during the internet shutdown was the economic impact. But I want to understand, apart from that, and maybe this can be a question to everyone in the room, apart from the economic disadvantages that Tanzania had to face, what other impacts did the ordinary citizens had to face during that period? And the impact could be maybe the lack of information, the lack of public trust to the institutions, or any other effects that the ordinary citizens had to face. And as we are discussing on the future of internet governance, what are the takeaways, or what can Tanzania do in the future to avoid the impacts that the ordinary citizens had to face during that period? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I think let's allow the good professor to respond to some of those. Maybe others who just need to further elaborate on some of the things that you've already highlighted.
Well, they're very good questions. Three pretty big questions. So, number one is about the power of the AI, the big tech firms. The other is about a very common question about the impact of hate speech through social media on vulnerable groups. And the third one is about was there more than an economic impact to the shutdown that we need to talk about. So let me deal with the tech firms first. I think Dan and I might disagree about this a bit, but I think that the idea that the tech firms are more powerful than governments is really out of touch with reality. What we see is that the tech firms have developed increasingly powerful technologies, but they are responding primarily to markets, right? And now what's happening is that those technological capabilities are becoming closer to the government. Now, we have to understand what governments are, right? Governments are the monopoly on violence within a territory. That's what sovereignty means. You are the sole legitimate user or exerciser of the police power and the military power in your territory, right? And so, however big and powerful you might think Google is, or Amazon, they do not have armies. They do not have policemen. They do not come knock on your door and arrest you. They do not shoot you if you are protesting in the street. It's only the government that can do that, right? So what you have to watch out for here is not so much the tech firms that by themselves. What you have to watch out for is some kind of an alliance between the big tech and state power that gives them some kind of unchecked ability for the government to use that technological capability against its citizens or against other countries, right? And that's why we're having a very big debate about this in the United States at this very moment. We could go into great detail about that, but I think it's more of a U.S. issue than a Tanzania issue, in the sense that, we view our big rival geopolitically as China, and China and the U.S. are engaged in a technological race. And in some ways, small countries like Tanzania can benefit from this, in the sense that both of these big powers might want to draw you in and help you out in order to get in, more people on their side. But that's a geopolitical game that is not so relevant to your domestic policy. Now, about Facebook and hate speech, I think this is kind of a very misinterpreted aspect of history. If you look at the Rohingya in Myanmar, they have been oppressed and exploited ever since Myanmar formed as an independent country in the 1950s, right? The issue is not that suddenly there was a social media and suddenly the Rohingya started to get oppressed, right? It was, if you look at the way they've been treated and the way they've been handled by the majority, I guess it's Buddhist culture, they are Muslim, they basically want them to go away, right? And it's very similar to the conflict, over, let's say, Israel and the Palestinians. It's similar to various kinds of issues in which you have a minority population that is not the same in terms of culture and religion as the majority or the people in control of the government. And so, yes, there was some disparaging and incitement means something that's actually illegal speech in the US and in most democracies where you are you're using speech to encourage people to harm others, right? You're standing up in front of a crowd and saying, kill that guy, right? That's incitement. That's not free speech. That's illegal. But if you look at who was doing that incitement, in the case of Facebook, number one, most of the actual incitement was on text messages, because more people had phones than had Facebook in Myanmar at that time. So it wasn't just Facebook. And if you look at people who were doing that, some of it were actually associated with the government, right? There are factions within the government. And the same thing in India, where you have lots of ethnic tensions between Muslims and Hindus, and you have some Hindu nationalist groups that are always saying disparaging things about Muslims and maybe encouraging people to attack or fight against them. And in that case, the government is not the solution. It's part of the problem, right? Because they are suppressing kinds of pro-Muslim factions and attacking or promoting certain forms of nationalism. And we've had the same problem in various countries. So generally, giving the power to regulate speech to the government actually doesn't make that problem better. It can actually make it worse, because you're essentially saying, we're going to have a central authority decide who can say what, right? And who is that central authority? Well, they're not some godlike neutral force that is saying, let's all be nice to each other. They are a political entity. So that's my response to the Facebook question, Myanmar. Now, you're very correct to bring up the question of course, the shutdown had more than economic impact. We were asked to sort of analyze the impact of these things on the economic development of Tanzania, so we kind of concentrated on the cost. And again, the economic cost projections are just that. They're projections based on some very simplified assumptions, just trying to get a handle on what it actually meant to do that. But the economic aspect is actually, in some ways less fundamental than the impact on democracy and freedom of speech. So that's, again, what makes these shutdowns very bad, is that they are sort of unilateral actions by whoever's in power to control the way people can communicate. And usually that's going to be done in order to defend their own interests, right? Now, you might think that in some cases, in some emergency situations, the government might have a legitimate reason to restrict or calm down public communication, but a general internet shutdown is a very crude way to do that, right? And very sweeping. And it's hard for me to understand the justification, but I'd listen to anybody who would want to develop a justification for it and explain what it actually does, other than just stop people from exercising their democratic capabilities.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm sure the people in this room may really not want to give a justification for a blanket internet shutdown like what we are seeing in most of the countries, not just Tanzania. If I'm allowed, I think we are just right on time. And I don't know if you have concluding remarks to why we should go and read this 70-page document. We've said everything, but in your concluding remarks, how do you see Tanzania moving forward in just simple terms? 10 years, given these positivities that have been highlighted, the negatives are still there, which we cannot undermine. In the next 10 years, where do you see Tanzania's digital space, or where do you hope Tanzania's digital space would be? How does it look like?
Well, the fact that we can have this conversation at all is a good sign. There are certain countries where you could not give a presentation criticizing the country's digital policies and then have 3 or 4 people from the government sitting in the audience and listening to you, maybe not very happily, but they're sitting there, they're listening. And so I'm feeling, it's the first time I've been to Tanzania, I'm feeling pretty impressed with the energy and the understanding of people here. Maybe it's a very small slice of the population. I'm obviously in your biggest city. I don't know anything about the countryside. But 10 years from now, I think you're going to see, I think, a lot of pressure to liberalize more, to open things up more. And we agree that with the report that if you do that, the government's tax revenues are actually going to increase, not decrease. They're not going to lose anything. I don't think, again, I don't have a lot of knowledge about the internal politics, but I do believe that if you restore a more open and democratic process, that it will not throw the country into instability. I think that is a risk. When you have political competition, you're competing over who gets the guns, basically, who has the power. And the whole point of democracy is that you do that peacefully. You do that through voting. And many times in many countries that breaks down. But I think it is, you know, as you can see from the shutdown in 2025, the government trying to protect its own power is also destabilizing and also saps the energy of the economy and the society. So I think that you are in a pretty good position to make progress. I also like to acknowledge the main author of this report is Brendan Kurbis and Karim Farhat. They are members of IGP who could not come here. So I'm the representative of IGP, but they played a big role in doing the research and preparing this report.
Thank you. You've done a very good job representing them. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the conclusion of this fire chat. And I'm hoping that you can read the detailed report, take time to analyze each and every aspect of the issues that are being raised, issues that are being pointed out that need to be addressed to advance Tanzania's digital governance landscape. So with that, I would like to hand over to
Ms. Kholila Mbowe.
Ms. Elebowe to guide us to the next session.
Thank you very much.